Good morning. Um, Adjusting my camera here. For today's daily encouragement, we are in chapter 2 of Colossians, and what a great chapter that is. And the verses I decided to highlight for my journal is verses 16 and 17. It says this: Therefore, let no one pass judgment on you in questions of food and drink, or regards to a festival, or a new moon, or a Sabbath. These are a shadow of the things to come, but the substance belongs to Christ. And I think it's so easy to become too focused on matters that are really secondary. And I think this is what Paul is getting at. Of course, in that particular culture, you had this division that was taking place between Jews and Gentiles. Jews really thinking that Gentiles needed to adhere to certain traditions and cultural nuances um, of the Jews for Gentiles to actually be a part of the church, and of course Paul all through his epistles was speaking against that. And in this particular chapter, he talks about this idea: don't pass judgment on questions about food or drink, or regards to festivals, new moons, or Sabbath. And the reason is that these are just a shadow. They're not the real thing. Matter of fact, when we get so caught up in secondary issues that uh, that are maybe pointing to the real issue, we get so caught up in secondary things that we don't even see the substance. We don't even see Christ. It's like I'm going to hug the shadow rather than the person that the shadow is, um, the person casting the shadow. And so additionally, this particular idea is wrapped around what I believe is the center of this entire chapter, and that is Paul's warning to them to not be taken captive by philosophies and empty deceit, which are according to human traditions and not according to Christ. And so I think it's so easy for us to get wrapped up in these philosophies that are surrounded by human tradition and not by Christ. And so I think what Paul is saying here is that you should focus on Christ. He is the substance. Why do we get so messed up by all these secondary things, and we make such big issues of them that we actually miss Jesus? How does that take place practically? I mean, in our culture, um, hymns versus no hymns. I mean, if you're not singing hymns, you're not worshiping God. Now, if you're singing contemporary music, you're not worshiping God. Or maybe the opposite, man, if you're singing hymns, that's old fashioned and how it's rigid. How can you be worshiping God? I mean, we get caught up in music style and all of these things. And the reality is you miss the substance in the whole picture. You have adopted a philosophy that is based on the tradition of man, uh, rather than on Christ. We miss the substance. We do this when we argue about, well, big church versus small church. We all have our preferences, but man, um, I have seen people argue for the fact that a big church is evil, or a small church is terrible because it doesn't have the programming that a big church might have. I think those things are just dumb. They're based on human tradition. They're based on a philosophy that is not according to Christ. Matter of fact, they are focused on shadows and not substance. I see this even with preaching, right? Some people have a preference of hell, fire, and brimstone. And that's just not me. That's not my preference. That's not how I function. And I just have to be authentic to who I am, right? I'm more of a teacher, and that's how I preach the gospel. And so, but people get caught up in that, preaching style, hell, fire, and brimstone versus someone who's more of a teacher. And I'm not saying that because I feel pressure by anybody or anything like that. I'm just saying these are things I see and read about in our culture, and I'm going, what in the world, man? We're so focused on these shadow things that we miss the substance. So I want to encourage you to don't be focused on the shadows. Get off the shadows. Embrace the substance. Look to Christ. Embrace Him. I, I'm tipping my hand here because all of this leads towards the first verse of chapter 3. And that is, if we've been raised with Christ, then seek the things that are above where Christ is. That's where we need to be focused on. The things that are above where Christ is. Let's focus on Him. Let's orient our heart and mind and thinking towards Him. Hope this was a blessing to you. God bless.